Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Keli Frazier-Cox, and we are going to talk about resilience. Keli, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited for today.
I'm excited as well. One of the things I know about the audience is we have people we have a mix of people in their careers, sales leadership career, and I think this one is going to be for those. I think if you're a sales leader, this is going to be a great episode for you. If you are an individual contributor and you are struggling with your first opportunity to sell into a downturn, this is exactly the episode that you want to listen to. If you're a sales leader and this is your first, say you got into sales in like the last 10, 12 years, now you're a sales leader, this is the episode you want to listen to. We're mostly going to talk about Keli's experience. We're going to talk about resilience and how to cope with adversity. I've got a couple of stories to share, including one of my biggest commission losses of all time. But I'll try not to. I might have told the story a couple of times before, so I'll try not to go too deep on my side. But with that being said, Keli, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So I'm curious why. I think everybody's probably had an indication, but in case we have some folks that are listening that aren't part of the tech community or the tech scene, what's changed in the last 12 months and why is it more difficult to hit quota now than it was 12 or 18 months ago?
Gosh, the world has changed, right? Post-pandemic, just as organizations are becoming more thoughtful about their spending, and the number of layers to get things done just continues to increase. I've seen that the complexity of the sale change so dramatically across my career. And part of where I'm hoping this episode will help is not just about sales process, but thinking through your personal process, how you're approaching some of that difficulty and thinking through in advance of how to counteract some of those challenges so that at the end of the day, I still think it's possible to hit quota. I still think it's possible to get there, but mindset is a big part of it.
I love it. I want to start with kind of back to 2001. And I think we had, as we discussed, you were selling back in 2001. Can you help me understand with compare and contrast the last kind of 12 years of selling into this? Everything's going up. It's been an amazing time to be a salesperson. There have been incredible new technologies coming on the market. There have been new markets that have been opening up. The world as we know it has gone online. Selling over Zoom, over whatever we're on today, Riverside, is so much more acceptable than back in the day when I started. And I had a territory and I drove around in a truck and I had to visit people in person, or I had to, hit them up and cold call to my territory that printed off on a sheet of paper from a Microsoft Dynamics, system from the early or late 90s. Things have certainly changed. I'm curious
for the better.
For the better, for sure. I think the point we're at now is like a little blip. It's a bit of a downturn. It's certainly not as easy. But the markets have gotten bigger. Help me understand, what was it like for you selling in 2001? Because, coming out of the bubble, coming out of so many different things, it was it must have been a challenging, crazy year.
Well, between the dot-com burst and 9/11, those were very difficult times. I guess the funny story would be my father used to print AAA maps for me because he was so worried about me traveling through these tiny towns by myself and not having a cell phone at first. That did come soon thereafter. And so just learning to read a map, going through that process, yes, it was challenging. But I think the biggest challenge was I got married in 2000, and that was kind of the start of the bust. And I came back from my honeymoon the day after and found out that my husband's organization was dissolving. So we had just had the happiest times in our lives. And they even sent us an amazing gift basket. And he is in HR. So he hired all the people for this organization. He had to go lay them all off and, deal with that emotion that comes out of it. And I certainly felt that similar kind of emotion and frustration in the sales process in my world, and dealing with organizations who are also experiencing that kind of bust. So the empathy in that process is something that I've carried over into today, of being that person that's not just about calling for the sale or calling for the next step in the process, but actually listening to the person who's on the line. Certainly the old school phones with the, curly cord back then, but, really listening. And one of the most poignant memories I have from that time was actually after 9/11. I was on a plane that day. It was quite traumatic time. And coming right back into the office and getting back to my cold calls. Of course, I had Manhattan territory. And I had so many conversations where people were staring at the hole, at the smoke, and thinking about it could have been them. And I would go home. I lived in DC at the time. I lived very close to Pentagon, looking at the smoke every day for months. So constant reminders of that time period. And I realized that listening skills were critical. Being able to let that executive on the line process what was going on. It built a relationship that did not produce a sale immediately, but it did later. They remembered that I listened. They remembered that I wasn't just trying to check the box in my sales process or get that phone call, that next thing scheduled. And that really stuck with me, I think, throughout the process as we hit some of those future ups and downs, even in 2008.
I mean, I remember 2008 myself, and I think I've told the story on the podcast before, so I'll keep it brief, but I was selling kitchen cabinets to high rises, and I had locked in 327 units, $1.5 million sale. I was getting paid a very low draw off future commissions and 10%. So here I am, fairly young age, is my first real field sales role, expecting a, $150K commission check, and watching our company go bankrupt before we could deliver on that project. It was, and then having to go and find something else. And it was, I mean, it's sort of like being a wedding planner to a couple who just called the wedding off. Yeah. And you're like, so anything we can do here?
Right. Is there anything left?
No, there's no wedding, so we don't need a wedding planner.
Yeah.
And I imagine so many people in so many different industries, it's probably made its way through the system now. And now we're kind of settling into this new normal.
This man's a good question about that. And how did your manager react? I'm sure they were counting on that too.
I had a contentious relationship with my manager. Was the owner of the company. It was him and his wife, and the two of them own the company. I don't want to say their names because but I'd say the husband was working on bigger deals, and so he didn't care. And the wife was more the operations, and so her and I had butted heads because I'm a sales guy. I'm just trying to get a deal done. I'm trying to, and so her and I had butted heads. And when they told me that they weren't going to be around to fulfill the contract, because you're planning for a year out, a deal for a year out, and we didn't have money to buy the materials for the contract. And so I was like, well, we're not going to be able to fulfill, so I know I'm not going to get this commission. I decided to quit. I didn't give my notice to the owners. I went to my customer first and said, hey, we're not going to be able to fulfill. I wanted to give you all the heads up that I'm going to be stepping away from this company because we're not going to be able to fulfill. Here's the I know you know who these people are, but like, here are the people that I believe are going to be able to get you through this, and this is what I'd recommend. And so I give the news to, I think it was like 22 or 23 or something, and I was talking to the owner of the construction company, which was, I was shaking, and then went back to my company and quit, and they were very angry. But 2 months later, they were out of business. So like, writing was on the wall. So that 150K was imaginary. It still hurt to lose, though.
I could see that. But what I'm hearing, though, is that value of customer first, right? Making sure that you're keeping your relationships at front of mind, and that you're keeping the needs of the people the problems you're trying to solve top of mind, right? And it's something about, in this topic of resilience, of having strong grounding. What are your values? What do you care about? Why do you come to work every day? Because that becomes a touchstone you come back to in difficult times. And without that, if it's just about the commission check, if it's just about the money, it is not enough to get you through tough times, because, as you know, sales is the biggest roller coaster. You have good days, bad days. Some deals you've been waiting on forever don't come through. So having something, whether that's being customer focused, whether that's having high integrity, whether that's focused on being service oriented, great collaborator, those are things you can come back to during hard times. And for me, it was certainly empathy for my clients and some of the things they were going through, and we were going through simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious. We've talked about the word resilience a few times. I'd love to understand what's your definition of resilience, just so we can kind of get all on the same page. Because I suspect people are listening, and they probably have, we all might have a slightly different version of resilience in our head. So what is resilience to you?
I'm glad you asked that, because I have heard quite a few definitions to resilience. For me, it's the ability to be aware of obstacles, but somehow overcome them intact, where you still have your whole self in place, you're as much balance as you can have coming out of it, and you're able to learn so that you do better in the future. So it's not just bulldozing through an obstacle, because so many people do that, including myself. And I call that more grit, just the ability to handle tough situations, the ability to just push through and get to the end. And I have to say, for me, that had negative response. I started to rely a lot more on caffeine, on alcohol, on sugar, those things to just get through. I started to develop quite a few unhealthy habits just to get through the quarter, get through the year. And what's changed for me is resilience and having a more balanced approach and learning from those mistakes so that I can begin to approach things smarter and more thoughtfully, more intentionally than in the past.
One of the other things we had kind of talked about in the pre-interview that kind of went along with resilience, and you had mentioned something about kind of being prepared and preparing for the kind of worst case scenario. I've heard it called pre-mortem. Can you talk to me about like what you mean by this, and just so we can kind of get the definitions out of the way, and then we can get into like some of the tactical, how do we build resilience and what does it look like on a team, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think a good way we could talk about this is the term the realistic optimist, because I always feel like I can hit my goal. And Lord knows I have seen some high goals. I always feel like I can hit them. But there's something around the acceptance that it's going to be hard, and understanding that there are going to be some challenges to get there, so that when challenges occur, they don't throw you off. They don't ruin your day. You become resilient. You're able to attack them in a way that's, calm, even keeled, in a thoughtful way. So the idea of this realistic optimist when you're looking at your deals is to then say, I know it's going to come in. the best way for me to know it's going to come in is to figure out all the problems that will happen before they happen, right? When do deals normally break down? When you get to procurement, or there's a decision maker that comes out of nowhere. Great. How can we proactively talk about this so that we avoid that pitfall? So many salespeople are worried that their deal will fall apart if they bring up a potential obstacle. It's going to slow the deal down, or they hadn't thought of it. Why should I bring it to their attention? The problem is it will come up, and it usually comes up at the very worst time. Just when you think it's about to come in is when the CFO decides he wants to review all contracts, right? So this is the idea of the realistic optimist of saying, let's prepare in advance. Let's kind of bolster ourselves and our team so that we have all our resources at the ready. And then as things happen, you just aren't as rattled.
I love that, because I remember in the early days of selling, I was so afraid. I was so driven on the calls by fear of losing this opportunity.
Yeah.
Because it felt to me like, I think I hadn't come to terms with like most opportunities aren't going to close yet. And so I looked at every op in my pipeline. I'm like, I can't lose it. Okay, what am I going to do so that I don't lose it? And like loss aversion is kind of the wrong way to approach the pipeline. If I accept the fact that 80% of these are going to go away, then I want to start digging for like, hey, let's find the factors that are going to cause this to go away. And it's okay, because 80% of all ops go away. When we might be able to get them back, and, they might come back eventually, and yada, 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 but you're not going to close. Nobody's ever going to close 100% of all opportunities. Right. And so I think getting to that point of like, just accepting that you're not going to close every opportunity, that struggle, that was a huge struggle for me, because I was afraid to bring these things up.
Yeah. Well, and this is also where your leader comes into play as well, because if your leader is talking to you in every pipeline meeting as if every opportunity is going to close, that puts that additional pressure. So that has to come from the rep, but also from the manager of, let's identify the ones that are most likely to close, and then let's remove all the obstacles, or as many as we can anticipate, to help ensure that the deal closes smoothly. But that idea of every deal is going to close, now I appreciate that optimism, but I just want to make sure we're adding that layer of realism on top of it as well. Yeah.
100%. I'm still optimistic, but I'm just not I'm realistically optimistic. As soon as you said that word, I was like, yes, that resonates, because I was 100% unrealistic, I was out of my world thinking 100% of the ops are going to close. And I remember my first sales manager just being like, maybe not first, but second or third, being like, yeah, no, here's why. And I remember feeling so bad, but not realizing and understanding that this is normal. Yeah. Like it's not something bad that I've done. This is just how sales works.
Well, and finding the no, right? That just qualify it, clear it out so that you can focus on the areas that are most likely to close. So almost chasing the no is a way to help clarify your pipeline. And when we're talking about building relationships, and during downturns or when things are difficult, the relationships do hold. And being able to walk your prospect through potential pitfalls and helping them prepare for where things could fall apart is invaluable. You'd be surprised. So many people don't do this for a living. They don't get huge contracts approved on a regular basis. You have more knowledge as the sales rep on how to get things done than sometimes your decision maker. So being able to guide them is showing added value, partnership, someone who's actually going to help them get things done. That helps you just, raise a little bit higher above the other vendors they're talking to.
Well, 100%. And back to the wedding planner analogy, it's all in preparation for this big day. And the big day may not necessarily be a single day, but it's certainly going to be a big change, right? Mm-hmm. Like if your buyer is going through yourself and account exec to do something, that means we're probably not talking about a few $1,000s. We're probably talking about tens of thousands of dollars or more, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if we're talking about a huge amount of money like that, this is likely a fairly major organizational change. Mm-hmm. And so, to your point, it's not just about them buying. and making a big purchase. It's about this process. They are changing a core way of, one thing that they do, and you're kind of the domain expert in that area. And so being able to have that candid and thorough conversation is one of the ways that as a salesperson, we can add value to the customer's life without actually, selling or without actually, charging them for anything.
And keep in mind, so many clients are also optimistic, right? They want to hurry up and get things done before the calendar year, and they're not seeing that there's a potential hurdle. In my experience, a legal review takes 3 months of back and forth. How long does it take for you? Ooh, I never thought about that. So having those moments where you're jointly planning is also a way to increase their investment in the deal, so that they're going out and proactively getting some of these challenges and potential obstacles removed for you too. So you become partners.
100%. I mean, it's September now and we're recording this, and we're coming into at least for predictable revenue, I'm behind on pipeline and I need to do something to impact Q4. And it's like, oh man, Q4 is starting very soon.
Yes, it is.
if we are just starting prospecting in September, that gives us October, November, December to ramp. Mm-hmm. You start beginning of September, it's like, okay, we're just hitting the ramp period and it's Christmas time. Now, we're not saying you can't get anything done, but if you're millions of dollars in pipeline behind and it's September, no, there aren't many. To be honest, I don't know of any outbound or demand gen channel that comes that quickly, other than maybe ads and spending an absolute monstrous amount on Google ads to build that pipeline. Yeah. But at the same time, if your sales cycle is 3 months, well,
you might have a shot. I was like, my sales cycles are usually more like 8 months, 12 months. And so it's to say, how can you impact Q4 revenue at this point is a stretch. It became how can we take an existing, maybe a lost, scale it down, last minute revenue, into budget, surplus, which we'll see who has that this year. So it was a different strategy than, brand new prospects. But either way, having a strategy where you're working through the timeline proactively with the client, with the prospect, that will be a way to qualify. Is this going to actually help you in the short term?
Totally. And it's helping them not make a bad decision. Like the worst thing I think I could do is help set up a customer that's going to be unhappy after 3 months. Like I want to have long-term happy customers. What we do is hard. What everybody does is hard. And especially now money is tighter. And so having candid upfront conversations and be like, oh, I don't think it's a good fit and here's why. And the number of times I've said that, and the number of times prospects have challenged me and been like, hey, no, you're actually wrong, and here's why. And it just turned out it was a misunderstanding on my part. It's like, hey, cool, I don't know everything. Great.
Yeah.
And, I think getting used to, accustomed to the first time of being that candid, that open, that transparent with customers, it took guts, it took confidence that I was definitely faking it the first couple.
Yeah.
But then it works. It's helpful to move the conversation forward, and you're like, wow, what a game changer. I can just be open and honest and upfront and candid and not have to hide anything. It made sales, for me at least, from like, not necessarily hard, but, mentally challenging to like, yeah, I can just show up and have a chat.
Well, I think the turning point is for me, was telling clients what we don't do, or telling prospects what we don't do. Because there's so much of show the product, show the features, the bells and whistles, which of course we want to get away from and focus more on the needs or the problems we want to solve. But also adding into that, it's not just all the positive, but it's if you need this, we're not the right person for that. And I've had folks go, no, I want the other thing. Could tell me more about that. And that's created momentum and buy-in early. But that candor is really important.
Which I think all of these things become so much more important in an environment like this, where there is certainly less money floating around. The days of unlimited funding of venture capital companies, your VC-backed startups that had, I don't want to say unlimited funding, but they had lots of money and big budgets, and very long. They were comfortable with very long payback cycles. I think that rose all boats or lifted all boats. And so it made selling a whole lot easier. Now we're kind of back to basics. We're like, this is what selling felt like 10, 12, 15 years ago, where it wasn't just, we'll give it a try. It's, hey, we've got to make a business case for this. And so I'm curious, it's harder for everybody. We talked about kind of pushing through versus bouncing back, bouncing forward. You kind of mentioned grit earlier, and it brought to mind that, when I was learning to water ski, it was like the one thing I had to learn to do is let go of the rope, because I'd fall but not let go of the rope, thinking maybe I can pull myself back. I don't have any skis on. So help me understand how you see the kind of pushing through versus bouncing back or failing forward.
Well, pushing through is when you start to lose some of your fundamentals. Good questioning, good listening, making a match between solution and problem. And one area that's worth highlighting here is this trusting the process, right? I feel like when times get hard, because when things are going great, you can do a little experimenting. You can fly by the seat of your pants a little bit. You can test out new ideas. But when times get hard, you do fall back on a process. And that's where you have to trust whatever sales methodology your organization is working with to dig in on each stage. And it will not show a sale immediately. It just won't, right? But believing that process is going to yield results, whether that's volume, detailed, the calls, whatever that process is. But I will say, as the leaders who are listening here, celebrating that process is the key, because we often only celebrate the outcomes. And when times are hard, the outcomes are going to be far few in between. So not just digging in and educating the team on the process, but celebrating each stage. You get a C-level meeting, let's talk about it. Let's have a team meeting about that. Let's highlight that the process is working and that each stage is progressing. So it's knowing the process, it's believing in the process, and I would say finding moments to celebrate that process are really key in building long-term resilience.
I love that. It's celebrating the little wins and the progress that you're making. You can't necessarily celebrate the outcomes.
Yes. I mean, we had celebrations when I think about 2008, when I was taking on a dramatically underperforming team and we were revamping everything. That I had to fall back on that because I didn't see how we were going to immediately impact revenue. So we were having, meetings about, let's all come together and talk about that C-level meeting that's coming up. Let's work as a group on that. Let's talk about how we can reshape some of those first pitch meetings so that everyone was bought in and part of that process of bringing our best approach, our best self to every interaction. Whereas when I saw teams who didn't do that, it became drudgery, right? I got to make these calls. I got to do this. And just feeling underappreciated, undervalued, and just starting to feel like, why? Why does it matter? Why am I doing this? I'm not making any money anyway. And they start to look for greener pastures. So having that moment where you're saying the work you're doing is valued, it matters, and it's going to work. And now, of course, when you get the win, you go crazy. But, all the steps that lead up to that, I think is pivotal, especially as a leader, to keeping your team motivated during, downtimes.
I love this. And I want to go a little bit off the beaten path here. I've got a few friends that are working for a variety of different companies ranging from sales leadership roles to individual contributor roles. And I got two in particular in mind. One is managing a team and one's an individual contributor. And the market has gone away from them. And when I say that, I mean, they've got an amazing product. Both companies have it. Both trends, different companies, both have an amazing product. I use both products. They are very, very good. Their buyers just aren't spending money on this right now. It used to be a very popular segment where people were spending lots, and it was one of the first budgets to get cut. What advice do you have for them? And I love the kind of getting the CEO, getting everybody involved in even the smallest deal because we want to celebrate that momentum, celebrate that progress. What are some other things that these two individuals can do to kind of keep that momentum going?
Mm. So when I think about that team in 08, 09, when I took on management, I had several executives pull me aside and say, "You're really talented. I don't know if you want that job. It's going to be hard. That no one's had success there before. Like, are you sure?" And through that process, I gave it a lot of thought of, do I want to make this move or not? But it's about the potential. Where do you see the potential? And the shift, we were selling market data, and mostly to the US, but we had global data available. And I was shocked that we really weren't digging into how do we help companies achieve their growth targets during this downturn. And what did they do in 08, right? Most people started to look internationally at developing markets, but we weren't active. Some companies got it and they called us for that data, but we weren't actively selling that solution. We weren't actively saying, here's where we see opportunity. Why aren't you looking there? So I would say partnering, trying to find the gaps is key, and working as a team to identify where those gaps exist. Some of that is analyzing your wins, the few you do have. Why are you winning and why is that working? But looking at the broader market, because as you can link yourself to the strategy of the organizations moving forward, it may require a little bit of twisting from what you've done in the past, but it worked out massively for us. We ended up doubling revenues in a downturn. And it seems obvious looking back, but in the moment, it wasn't. Everyone just kept thinking, how do we keep doing the same thing better, shorter, more efficient? And there was some of that, but there was a huge moment there that just needed the dedication and time to figure it out. And you have to get off the treadmill. You have to get off the hamster wheel of the long to-do list to have the thought time to figure that out.
It sounds like you almost went back to like your product market fit and said, okay, well, this was the product and this was the market we sold it to. That has changed. That's broken. We need to start afresh. Is that
Correct.
fair?
That is. Yeah. And I mean, we still had our core. We still had the things we always did. But a downturn is one of the rare opportunities that risk-averse companies are willing to try new things. So finding the opportunity in the downturn, if I had suggested that 5 years later, I think it would have been met with just silence. But as you're trying to figure things out, this is where creativity thrives. This is when innovation should have a moment to thrive. So leaving room for, as a rep, thinking about it for your own territory, but as a leader, creating that space for your team to have some of that moments of thinking and brainstorming, actually have some good opportunity for results.
And it's interesting now that you mention it, like back to my previous comment about people don't do anything unless, there's big organizational change. Mm-hmm. And, up until the right status quo, we're still growing. There's no reason to do anything different. Yeah. When the market comes and smacks you in the face, well, now people are trying to do things differently. And I think what your advice is not just to say, oh, work for a company that has a big opportunity in an untapped market, which is kind of, is one way to look at, that. The other way is to say, chances are every company has a different way of positioning themselves. But what we need to do is find the progress that people are trying to make and see if we can attach ourselves to that.
Yes, I've always talked about myself as a lemons into lemonade kind of person. Try to find where is the opportunity here, where is the moment to differentiate, and whether that's 9/11 or whether that's 2008, people were so desperately doing the same things, and the environment had clearly changed. So, what's most important is, are you in the right environment where that will be welcomed?
Totally understand. Kind of, let's say this company, these individuals, they have tried everything. And I'm not saying these two have. But for the people that are like, hey, I'm trying, the market's just not there. how do you think about, balancing, you want to be resilient, you want to stand for your team, you want to, support your manager, your boss, and, the leaders that have helped bring you up. But how do you balance that with kind of finding the right time to cut bait and move on?
It's a hard question. I would probably challenge a little bit on you've done everything. Certainly my role as an executive coach, that would be for me to poke around a little bit just to make sure that you've tried all the tactics or you've thought about all the options. But I will say as a chief commercial officer, that was a huge part of my role, is to figure out, has this product run its course? Should we change? How should we reshape things? And so being in leadership, that is an opportunity to have some of those ideas. But if you're within the system, if you're a rep and you're trying to decide what to do, I would say having a good support system is a start. And especially as salespeople, we tend to be a bit bulldozer, right? We're going to get it done. We're going to figure it out. You want to do it all on your own, partially so you can take a lot of the credit, right? So, I think there's some of that there. But having a support system where you can make sure that you've looked at the angles, whether that's a mentor in the industry, whether that's your friend base, whether, frankly, if that's therapy or coach, how you've built your support system is key to the idea of resilience, because they will help you think through those angles and have differing perspectives and help you come up with what's that transition plan look like. So are you in a position where you can quit tomorrow and take off 6 months and think about things? Do you need a job right away? Do you want to transition into a different industry? What does that transition look like? So I would say consulting and having a support system is the first step before deciding what to do.
Love it. I also think there's an opportunity to, like, when you said, hey, what are all the things? Like, I love the opportunity to reframe and say, hey, it's going to be tough everywhere. I know this product. Now's my opportunity to learn how to sell in the hardest moment of my career, hopefully. And so if it is hard, great. Like, you're getting paid to go to the gym. Okay? If you can do that mental jujitsu and kind of flip around the frame on yourself, I think you can flip it from, oh, this is a thing that's happening to me, to, hey, this is a great opportunity, where the stakes are pretty low because expectations, everybody needs to sell. But if your company went from selling 10 units, a month per rep down to 1, expectations are probably as low as they're going to get. So It does also present a great opportunity to your point earlier, to try some new things and be bold and kind of, obviously you want to stick to the process, but, you throw a little variance in there, see what happens.
No, I totally agree. And that would be part of the have you tried everything of, have you thrown out some new ideas? Are you being part of the solution? But I will say I have run into quite a few people who are more likely to say, I'll just get another job. And I would argue some maybe give up too quickly because one factor has changed or a leader has changed. And some of that can be attributed to the fact that there hasn't been a lot of adversity to date. So when it happens, it's easy to just say, I'll try somewhere else. I'll go somewhere else. But I would argue that these are the moments that help you become a good leader in the future. So that's hard to say when you've got to pay your rent. I get that. But these are moments that you're going to touch on as a leader, how you've come through it, what you learned, that are going to serve you well for, many, many years to come. So when I look back on, 08, 01, all those things, I felt like I came away a stronger leader, but a more creative, resilient person because you came through it. At the end of the day, you're going to get through it. The question is how, and you get to decide how. So that's what I'm hoping, with today's conversation will help give a few ideas for folks to start.
I love that. I was thinking about, I think I tried to grit through after my experience in 08, and I didn't do a great job of, say, processing and like giving myself time and going to my network. I didn't have much of a network, and Yeah, because it was my first real outside sales job, and I ended up, I'll say, bonking, and like I took another job real quick. It wasn't the right job. I jumped into it. It was a big mistake. Really nice people, but it was just a job I didn't love, I didn't care about, and it was bad for both me and for the company. And I ended up leaving the country. I went to Australia for a year because I needed that time to unwind, and like, you know what, I'm going to take a break from sales. I worked in a bar for a year, give or take, and like I needed that reset. Not all of us have the luxury or the ability, especially like now. If I went through the same thing, I definitely couldn't just take off for a year and go through and reset. And so I think, you know, having these, you know, if you're not 23 and have ultimate flexibility to just get out of your lease and go somewhere else, like these are important things to consider before, you know, making big decisions.
Well, I cannot underscore having a support system more. It's something that I didn't learn until having personal tragedy. And part of what I love about these venues and shows like yours, Colin, are how do we help people achieve that learning curve a lot faster, certainly than what I went through. When I think about the ups and downs and, you know, just the challenges of still showing up professionally and still trying to achieve target when there was so much inner turmoil happening. If I had had that support system, you know, who knows, you know, where I'd be today, but it would have made that time a lot easier and just able to think through your options in a clearer way. Because when you're gridding it through, you're not thinking about your options. You see one option, keep working. You know, one option, just quit. It's really hard to see the spectrum, to see the gray, to see what's in front of you, the opportunities that are in front of you when you're on your own trying to figure things out.
Totally agree. I've heard you say in the past that resilience is a verb. Can you tell me what you mean?
I hear a lot of people say they're resilient, like it's a one moment in time, or resilient through the pandemic, like almost as if it's like, I'm done. I'm resilient. I've achieved that. And I don't think you ever achieve full resilience. It is a constant process that you have to be aware of. And it starts with self-awareness of, you know, knowing how you respond when you start to get stressed, catching some of those warning signs early, but then having a set of mechanisms to help you deal with that. So part of that is kind of regularly checking in with yourself, whether that's for work or personally, but then being able to say, what do I need right now? You know, do I need more support from my manager? Do I need to take time off? You know, what do I need to get through this moment? And realizing that there are quite a few options in front of you to do that. With that, and knowing that it's a constant process, one thing that I had to implement at a certain point was just a quarterly. I took a half day once a quarter. And that half day once a quarter was just to get away from my desk, get away from it, and just kind of feel what I feel and figure out what's going on and say, where do I want to focus now? You know, or where do I need to focus? And sometimes it's work. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's health. So I didn't realize how important that break was. I definitely was of that mode that more work is better. I used to be one of those people who would talk about how many hours, and I started with London at 5 a.m. and I ended with Singapore at 10 p.m. And, you know, I got to a point where I realized I was actually limiting my food and liquids because I didn't want to actually take a bio break. I'm like, I got to work. I got to keep going. And without having those breaks, that is my natural tendency. And that's what took over. So knowing that, forcing and planning and keeping those scheduled breaks makes a difference. So when I say resilience is a verb, it's really around how do you make this a practice? How do you think about this on a regular basis to maintain your wellness, but also to maintain your focus?
And I think that's quite possibly the most important element here is that it's not just what you're talking about is not just about making it through alive. It's making it through and thriving.
Yes, absolutely.
Making it through and still being able to perform, and not making it through, but bonking like I did, and then needing, I mean, I probably didn't need a year to reset, but turns out Australia is a fun country.
Yeah.
You know?
Hey, I'm glad you had that time.
So I don't regret it at all. However, if I went through the same now, it would be a much different story. I'd have a lot less freedom, flexibility. And so being able to make it through tough times, whether it's a tough quarter, a tough month, a bad deal, a bad beat on a deal, it's not just about surviving. It's about surviving and doing well.
Yeah. And I will say grit took me a long way. It got me through a lot of deals, but it wasn't until I had personal loss that it took me like over the cliff where I couldn't handle it. And I ended up having some major health issues. And I also took 9 months off, but it wasn't by choice. And when you think about that, if you had the choice to if I had taken care of myself throughout, it would have been a very different, my teams didn't feel it. I don't think work felt it. I felt it. My family felt it. And certainly my health suffered because of it. So I did take time off, and I wish I'd been in Australia, but I did, this is how I really started to say, it's got to be different. And for those who are struggling through a downturn now, this is the moment to say it needs to be different. Doing the same things is not the solution. It's figuring out how do you adapt and who should you be, at this time, given this situation.
And I think that's a really interesting question. And I think I want to look at this through the lens of like resilience as a team, resilience as an individual, because we've had a very individualistic focus throughout the episode. But I'm curious if we could put the team lens on, and I'd love to understand, how do you think about resilience sort of as a team, and like building resilience as a team versus building resilience as an individual?
Yes, I think the leader has such a huge impact here. And most of my work now is with leaders because they're trying to help their teams who are new to sales or maybe are dealing with some of these first obstacles. And rather than being, which we probably had a risk of being at the beginning of this episode, kind of the back in my day, I had to walk uphill in the snow. We don't want to be that for our teams. So how can we build an environment where we can help coach resilience and they find their own way and their own scenario, which is different from what we had. So one thing I think is important with resilience is your team has to know that you have their back, right? Not unconditionally, right? You still have to give feedback, you still have to performance manage, but the ability to experiment, to try new things, to think creatively, to open the doors maybe to opportunities or, like you said earlier, products that changes. As the leader, you need to have their back on that. You have to encourage that. And all those ideas won't work. It's so how do you respond when someone makes a mistake? How do you respond if an idea falls flat? Those are key moments as a leader to help build that resilience. If you're approaching it from let's learn from it, how can we do better next time? How can we spot trends that will help us in the future? Those are areas that will help the team be strong. And the other area I wanted to call out, obviously the celebration bit we talked about earlier of enjoying the process, but also encouraging diversity of thought. So when I look at some leaders that are building teams, they're building teams that look exactly like them. How they make decisions, their hobbies, how they, where they went to school or companies that they worked from in the past. They have a very narrow view of who's going to be successful in this role. And with that, you get very narrow views on solutions and how to deal with problems. Whereas the ability to bring in differences in thought, differences in temperament, differences in background, that now gives you the ability to see a challenge with a 360 lens. So I usually work with my teams on DISC, which is a communication assessment. And in that, you try to want to have, there are 4 major styles in that. And you want to have almost all those styles represented on your team. Because one person's going to look out for how does this impact our customer? One person's going to look out for have we done our data, our research, our due diligence? Someone's going to keep us on track for no, we want to make sure we can do things that will have short-term results. So when someone's going to say, hey, we haven't actually had a team meeting in a long time, we need to get the group together. So when you think about all those styles together, that is a big piece of what helps with resilience, because you want to get ideas from different places and from different points of inspiration. Because as we talked about, this is the moment for creativity and innovation. And it's very hard to do that when you've got the exact same profile in your entire team.
It resonates. I think the first 5 salespeople I hired sounded exactly like me. And I remember looking back on, the first 2 hires were women and they were great. And it's not that these next 5 were bad. They were just all exactly the same. And we missed out on that diversity of thought where it was like hiring an echo. It was like, yeah, this is a good idea. Oh yeah, I've done that. It's like, there's something that's missing here that I can't quite put my finger on.
Well, so I worked for several British-based companies, and they have a special kind of challenge around pedigree, right? So they would only hire people from a certain part of the city or from a certain school. And though the picture might look diverse, gender diversity, it was basically the same person. And so when they hit adversity, they had 3 great ideas, but when that didn't work, they were just out of it. They just had no idea where to go next. And then they would look to us and say, oh, well, you're Americans, you're always trying these crazy things and doing these crazy things. And, but through that, we were able to work our way through it. We tried some stuff that didn't work, but we worked through it, whereas they stayed stuck. And so when I think about that diversity of thought, that has, in my opinion, was a critical piece to building a strong team that was able to succeed in the hardest times.
Appreciate that. I really appreciate your time today. I wanted to kind of land the episode with, advice for new reps that might be starting right now. The thought that kind of triggered for me was, in some ways, you're almost at an advantage. Like, I think we're going to look at the cohort of AEs coming out of 2023, 2022 as some of the best AEs created. Like, when you zoom out and you look at, say we were a professional sports team drafting new AEs, you're like, man, that was a really good cohort. What was happening is because these reps were born in the toughest times. And so I think, it's tough now, but if you look at the impact this is going to have on your career, yeah, what a great time to cut your teeth. Not necessarily financially in the short term, but I guarantee financially in the long term, those that survive are going to be as, very proficient at selling through all different types of scenarios. So I'm curious, what would your kind of parting advice be to these new folks that are just getting into sales roles?
I agree. I think my personal ways of being successful in sales was being even keeled. If you don't get too high, if you don't get too low, you're able to kind of take things as they come and try and make rational decisions around what to do next. But that's really hard to do if you haven't seen adversity. And being able to see adversity, it gives you perspective. And it helps to make sure that future obstacles won't be as challenging. After you survive this, you kind of take on anything. So you're building that muscle. You're building the muscle of resilience, and you're building the opportunity to help others in the future, whether as a leader or as a peer. But my advice would be ask for help. It's really hard to ask for help. When you're new, you want to look like you got it all under control. You want to feel like you're going to achieve, push through no matter what, but ask for help. A peer, someone who's done it, your leader, build that support system, because it takes effort to build it. No one gives it to you. You got to go out and find those people, but that will not fail you. It's an opportunity to learn. And these are people who are going to support you and lift you up in your hardest times. And they'll be there to celebrate once you're able to, make it to that sale and make it to the finish line.
Love it. Keli, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Loved it.
I wanted to ask before we wrap, talk to me a little bit about, the work that you do at Promote Leaders. And if somebody's listening, they're like, oh, I wonder if I could get Keli to help. So help me understand a little bit about, the type of work that you all do and how people might be able to reach you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. This has by far been the best job ever. It's been the culmination of all the work in my life. My biggest roles, being a head of L&D, a general manager, chief commercial officer. When I look back, development and helping others achieve their potential has always been my goal. And that's what Promote Leaders is all about. Creating the next generation of leaders. And I do that through coaching and keynote speaking and training. LinkedIn is probably the very best way to get in touch with me. And I actually have a free webinar coming up October 2nd on resilience. So the topic is from stressed out to relaxed resilience. And it's all about very quick practices you can do in the middle of your day to reset, refocus, and kind of bring some of that creativity and innovation back.
I love it.
Yeah.
Send me a link to that. We'll make sure I add it into the show notes So if you're listening or watching, just click the description. It should be there for you.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing.
Right on. And we'll also include a link to your LinkedIn if people want to connect with you, reach out and follow you for all the great stuff that you post.
Perfect. Yeah. Just published several new newsletters and articles on this topic that you may find of interest.
All right. Well, Keli, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Right on. And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see y'all next week.